Mr. Thompson lay on the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. He felt a dull ache in his chest, not from the sickness that had brought him here, but from the loneliness that consumed him. Each passing hour felt like an eternity. The door would occasionally open, but it was always a nurse or a doctor. No familiar faces, no family. His family, the people he had cared for and built a life with, were nowhere to be seen. None of them had bothered to visit him since he was admitted to hospital weeks ago. He stared at the ceiling, his mind swirling with thoughts of his company, his legacy, and the family he had worked so hard to provide for. Meanwhile, his wife, Amanda, lounged at home, enjoying the luxury Mr. Thompson's wealth afforded her. She sipped wine while texting her younger lover, oblivious to her husband's suffering. Their sons, Michael and Daniel, were not far from the hospital, plotting their next move to take control of their father's fortune. Mr. Thompson had not always been wealthy. In his youth, he was just a determined man with big dreams and an unrelenting work ethic. Born in a small fishing village along Ghana's coast, he had watched his parents toil day and night to make ends meet. Determined to break the cycle of poverty, he left his hometown as a young man and moved to Accra, the city of opportunities. Life in the bustling capital was not easy. Mr. Thompson worked menial jobs, often sleeping on the floors of his friends' tiny rooms. He saved every pesewa he earned, pouring it into his small trading business. Over the years, his hard work paid off. The small business grew into a thriving enterprise, and soon he became a respected figure in the city's business circles. However, wealth came at a personal cost. Mr. Thompson had been so focused on building his empire that he delayed marriage, thinking he would settle down only after achieving his dreams. By the time he was ready, he was much older. That was when Amanda entered his life. Amanda was beautiful, lively, and much younger than him. At first, their relationship seemed perfect. Amanda made him feel alive again, and within a year, they were married in a lavish ceremony. A few years into their marriage, they had 2 sons, Michael and Daniel. Mr. Thompson adored them. He spared no expense in giving them the best: expensive schools, lavish gifts, and endless opportunities. He wanted them to have the life he never had. In the early days of their marriage, Amanda seemed happy. But slowly, things began to change. Amanda's interest in him waned, and she started spending more time out, claiming she was visiting friends or running errands. Mr. Thompson began to feel a distance between them, but whenever he tried to ask, she would brush off his concerns. As for Michael and Daniel, Mr. Thompson's relationship with them became complicated as they grew older. Michael, once a cheerful child, turned increasingly greedy and selfish. His conversations with Mr. Thompson centered more and more around money and possessions. Michael's greed didn't appear overnight. It grew slowly, changing him from a happy, hopeful boy into a person driven by wealth and power. As a child, he appreciated everything Mr. Thompson gave him. Living in comfort, he enjoyed privileges like private school, vacations, and luxury items. Mr. Thompson wanted his sons to grow up grateful and responsible, but for Michael, this comfort led to entitlement. In his teenage years, Michael expected everything to come easily: gadgets, money, a lavish lifestyle. By adulthood, he was more interested in the wealth behind his father's business than in learning how it worked. He felt entitled to it all, resenting Mr. Thompson's control over the company. As his frustration grew, Michael's spending increased, and he enjoyed flaunting his wealth. His friends' admiration fueled his belief that he deserved the fortune, and he began seeing his father's health as a barrier to his inheritance. Daniel, on the other hand, had tried his hand at a few business ventures, but they had all failed. He had become involved with some dangerous people, and now he owed them a lot of money. Daniel's path to selfishness and desperation was different from Michael's, but equally sad. Unlike his brother, Daniel always felt lost and unsure of himself, struggling to match Michael's confidence and their father's success. Though he had the same privileges, Daniel often felt inadequate. In school, he did only okay, and dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur, but lacked the focus to succeed. After graduating, he convinced Mr. Thompson to lend him money for a business, which soon failed. Undeterred, he tried again, borrowing from risky sources, and faced more debt when this attempt also collapsed. Desperate, he asked Mr. Thompson for more money, but Mr. Thompson suggested he get a steady job instead. Daniel felt humiliated, believing his father doubted him and favoured Michael. Resentment grew, and he began to see Mr. Thompson as an obstacle. Influenced by others, Daniel convinced himself he deserved a share of the fortune to pay his debts and live freely. Though his family was beginning to disappoint him, Mr. Thompson remained hopeful. He wanted to believe that Amanda, Michael, and Daniel would eventually come to value the family he had worked so hard to build. But as the days went by, he started to feel increasingly alone in his own home, burdened by the sense that the people he loved might not feel the same about him. As the years went by, Michael and Daniel began pressurizing Mr. Thompson to hand over the business to them because he was growing old. But he resisted because he knew that they did not care about the business, but rather the money that came with it. Despite his age, Mr. Thompson remained sharp, running his company with the same determination as always. But then, out of nowhere, his health began to decline. Although he had always been active, he suddenly started feeling tired more often. He would wake up in the morning feeling exhausted, his hands slightly shaking, his head a bit cloudy. At first he brushed it off as part of aging, but as the weeks passed, the symptoms worsened. One afternoon, as he sat in his home office, his hands trembled as he tried to sign a document. He felt dizzy, and his vision blurred slightly. He took a deep breath, but it didn't help much. Just as he tried to stand up, everything went black and he collapsed onto the floor. His family found him and rushed him to the hospital. He was placed under observation as doctors tried to understand why a man who had always been healthy was suddenly so frail. The days stretched on, and Mr. Thompson found himself alone in a cold hospital room, waiting for his family to visit him. But days passed, and no one came. At first he tried to convince himself that maybe they were just busy. "They'll come soon," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. He imagined Amanda walking in with a comforting smile, or Michael and Daniel sitting beside him, asking him how he was feeling. But as the days passed without a single visit, the reality of his isolation became painfully clear. Mr. Thompson felt his heart grow heavy with disappointment. He had dedicated his life to these people, worked long hours, sacrificed his health, and poured his heart into providing for them. He thought of the times he had watched his sons grow up, hoping they would one day respect him and care for him in return. He remembered the trust he had placed in Amanda, believing that she loved him as much as he loved her. Now, lying alone, he felt like he was a stranger to them, as though he meant nothing more than the wealth he had worked so hard to build. On one particularly quiet evening, he glanced over at the empty chair beside his bed. It was meant for visitors, a place for loved ones to sit and keep him company. But it remained empty, a cold reminder of how alone he was. The loneliness seeped into him, filling every corner of his heart. He realized that despite all his success, all his achievements, he had no one by his side in his time of need. The family he had thought would be there for him was absent, and it felt as if his entire life's work had been for nothing. He tried to hold back the tears, but they fell anyway, silently rolling down his cheeks. He felt a deep sense of betrayal, knowing that the very people he had trusted and loved were too busy enjoying his wealth or planning their own futures to care about his suffering. "How could they do this?" he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. "How could they just forget me?" The feeling of abandonment gnawed at him, leaving him hollow. He felt like he was disappearing, like he was fading away in this hospital room with no one to remember or care about him. He found himself wishing for just one comforting word, one reassuring touch, but there was nothing. The emptiness around him felt like a prison, one built by the very people he had called family. While Mr. Thompson lay in the hospital, feeling abandoned and betrayed, life at home went on as though he were already gone. The house that used to be quiet and filled with a sense of his steady presence was now buzzing with a different energy, one that was self-serving and cold. Michael and Daniel saw their father's absence as an opportunity. With Mr. Thompson out of the way, they could finally get closer to controlling the family business. The brothers, who had once been spoiled boys indulged by their father's generosity, now saw themselves as the heirs to his empire. They knew he had resisted handing over control, and his refusal had been a source of frustration for them for years. But now, with his health failing, they felt victory within reach. Late one evening, Michael and Daniel sat in the study, a room where Mr. Thompson had once reviewed business plans and made countless decisions for the company. They were now rummaging through his files and records, laughing and talking as if they were already the rightful owners. "This is it, Daniel," Michael said, grinning as he skimmed through financial reports and company projections. "Father can't hold on forever. Once he's too weak to manage, the company will be ours. Just imagine, all that power in our hands." Daniel leaned back in the large leather chair, smirking as he imagined the life that awaited him. "We're finally going to live the way we deserve, Michael. All that money, all that influence, it'll be ours to control." He let out a small, satisfied laugh. No more listening to Father's lectures about hard work and earning our place. It's our birthright. Their conversations were filled with schemes and plans, ways they could expand the business, not for the legacy, but for the profit they could pocket. They talked about selling off assets they deemed unnecessary and how they could streamline operations to cut costs, all with the aim of maximizing their personal gain. The loyalty and respect Mr. Thompson had built within the company over the years meant nothing to them. They saw it purely as a source of wealth, and they wanted it all. Meanwhile, Amanda felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. With Mr. Thompson in the hospital, she was no longer burdened by pretending to care for him. Her role as a supportive wife had been nothing more than an act, one she had worn out of necessity rather than love. But now, without him around, she felt liberated. Her days were now filled with leisure and indulgence. She spent her mornings in high-end boutiques, buying designer clothes and jewellery, dressing up not for Mr. Thompson, but for her younger lover, Kwame, a man with charm and youthful energy who kept her entertained. She loved the thrill of being with Kwame, and with Mr. Thompson out of sight, she no longer had to sneak around or make excuses. The house, once a place where Mr. Thompson's warmth and generosity had created a stable home, was now filled with greed, selfishness, and betrayal. Each family member had become so wrapped up in their own desires that they no longer thought of Mr. Thompson as a person who had loved and provided for them. Instead, he was an obstacle, someone who had served his purpose and could now be pushed aside. One afternoon, while lying in bed, Mr. Thompson looked toward the door, hoping to see Amanda or his sons walk in. He waited, listening to the quiet beeping of the machines around him. Finally, the door opened and Amanda entered, but she looked distracted, as if she had other things on her mind. "Amanda," he said with a weak smile, "I'm glad you came. I've missed you." She offered a faint smile in return, but didn't look him in the eyes. "I'm here, Thompson," she replied, her voice flat, "but we need to talk. You're not getting any younger, and running the company is taking a toll on you. You should think about handing over control to Michael and Daniel." Mr. Thompson's face fell. He had hoped for words of comfort, maybe a reminder that he wasn't alone. But instead, Amanda seemed focused only on the company. "Is that all you're here for?" he asked, his voice soft and pained. "To talk about the company?" Amanda sighed, looking away. "I just think it's best for everyone. You should be resting, not worrying about business." With that she left, leaving Mr. Thompson feeling even more abandoned and heartbroken. Soon after, Michael and Daniel started visiting him too, but their visits didn't bring him comfort either. They would sit beside him for a short while, showing fake concern, then bring up the topic of the company. "Father," Michael said one day. "You're not as strong as you used to be. It's only natural that Daniel and I start managing things. You don't want the business to suffer, do you?" Mr. Thompson looked at his son, searching for a hint of genuine care, but all he saw was a cold eagerness. "No, Michael," he replied firmly. "I built that company with hard work. I can't just hand it over when I'm not sure you're ready for it." Daniel leaned in, his voice soft but his words sharp. "Father, don't you trust us? We're your sons. We deserve to take over." Mr. Thompson shook his head, the disappointment clear in his eyes. "Trust is earned, Daniel, and I don't believe either of you understands what it takes to run this company." After they left, Mr. Thompson lay back, feeling more isolated than ever. His own family was more interested in his wealth than in his well-being. Days passed, and a new nurse, Anna, began looking after Mr. Thompson. She was kind and gentle, always bringing a warm smile with her. She noticed how no one came to visit him regularly, and she felt a pang of sadness for the old man who seemed so alone. Anna had lost her father young, and seeing Mr. Thompson abandoned by his family reminded her of how she wished she could have been there for her father. One day, while checking his vitals, Anna spoke gently. "Mr. Thompson, don't you have any family visiting you? It seems quiet here." He sighed, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "I do. But they seem to have more important things to do than visit an old man in a hospital bed." Anna was deeply touched. From that day on, she made an effort to spend a little more time with him, bringing him small comforts like an extra pillow or a warm cup of tea. She would sit with him and chat, sharing stories and listening to his thoughts. In the days that followed, Anna started noticing odd behavior from Michael and Daniel. They would come to the hospital but didn't always go directly to see their father. Instead, she often saw them meeting with one of Mr. Thompson's doctors in a private room. The meetings seemed tense, and the expressions on the faces of Michael and Daniel were not those of worried sons, but of men in business negotiations. One day, while delivering medication, Anna overheard Michael talking to the doctor. "Isn't there a way to make him more compliant? He's stubborn about this company business. We need him to step down." The doctor responded in a low voice, but Anna caught a few words, enough to realize they were discussing ways to influence Mr. Thompson's mental state. She felt her heart race. What were they planning? She continued to observe them discreetly and took a closer look at Mr. Thompson's medications. Anna noticed some drugs that didn't make sense for his condition. These particular medications could cause weakness and confusion, something that matched exactly what Mr. Thompson had been experiencing. Disturbed, Anna went to see Dr. Abigail, a trusted colleague. "I think something strange is going on with Mr. Thompson's treatment," she said, explaining her concerns. Dr. Abigail frowned, examining Mr. Thompson's chart. "These medications shouldn't be given to someone in his condition. This could actually harm him." The two women decided to keep a close eye on Mr. Thompson's care. Anna felt a growing sense of responsibility to protect him, and she became determined to find out the truth. Anna and Dr. Abigail quietly continued their investigation, becoming more convinced that something sinister was happening. They noticed that Michael and Daniel met with the doctor more often, and each time Mr. Thompson's condition seemed to worsen. He grew weaker by the day, and his memory began to fade. Some days he struggled to remember simple details, which made it easy for his family to claim he was no longer fit to run his own business. One afternoon, Anna overheard a tense conversation between Michael and the doctor in a private room. "Are you sure the medication is working?" Michael asked, his voice cold. "Yes," the doctor replied, "but you need to be patient. It takes time for the symptoms to fully show." Michael sounded impatient. "My brother and I need him out of the way. We've waited long enough." Anna's heart raced as she listened from behind the door. She knew now that they were intentionally harming Mr. Thompson. After hearing this, Anna went to Dr. Abigail, who agreed that they needed proof before going to the hospital authorities. Together they planned to secretly record Michael's next conversation with the doctor. The following day, Anna placed a small recording device in the room where Michael and the doctor usually met. When Michael arrived, she waited outside, heart pounding, hoping the plan would work. She heard the door close, and the conversation began. "Look, we're paying you enough to make this happen," Michael said sharply. "If he's not weak enough soon, we'll find someone else who can do the job." The doctor sounded nervous but replied, "Don't worry. I'll increase the dosage slightly. That should make him more confused and weak. Just remember, if anyone finds out—" "No one will find out," Michael interrupted. "Just do your job." After Michael left, Anna retrieved the recording device and, with Dr. Abigail's help, listened to the conversation again. They had all the evidence they needed to expose Michael's plot. Without wasting any time, they brought the recording to the head of the hospital and explained what they had discovered about Mr. Thompson's unusual medications and the corrupt doctor. The hospital management was shocked and immediately launched an investigation. Mr. Thompson's care was placed under a different, trusted doctor who stopped the harmful medications. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson had no idea of the betrayal unravelling around him. He often lay in his bed, staring out the window, wondering why his body was failing him so suddenly, so mysteriously. He'd had dreams of retirement, of peaceful years with his family, but those dreams felt like distant memories now. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson awoke to find Anna standing by his bedside with a gentle yet urgent expression on her face. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm, "there's something I need to tell you." Anna then told him everything that they had discovered. Mr. Thompson was devastated to learn that his own family had tried to get rid of him so that they could have his money. Anna advised Mr. Thompson to hire a private investigator to look deeper into his family's activities. The investigator began digging into Michael and Daniel's activities. What he found was shocking. Both sons had been involved in schemes to accelerate their father's decline. He found out that Michael and Daniel had been poisoning Mr. Thompson's drinks at home long before he ever went to the hospital. Once he was admitted, they bribed the corrupt doctor to continue the dosage. Their goal was to declare Mr. Thompson mentally unfit so they could gain control of the company. That's why he had suddenly grown weak and why his symptoms seemed to worsen after being admitted. As if that wasn't enough, the investigator also uncovered Amanda's betrayal. The investigator discovered that she had been withdrawing large sums of money from Mr. Thompson's business accounts. She had also sold off some of his properties, luxury apartments and a beachfront villa, without his knowledge. The funds were being funneled into the lavish lifestyle of her younger lover, a man half her age who drove flashy cars and frequented expensive clubs. Meanwhile, Daniel, who was heavily in debt from failed business ventures, had been embezzling company funds to pay off dangerous people who had been threatening him. Armed with all this evidence, the investigator worked with the hospital and the police to put an end to the scheme. Mr. Thompson was devastated to learn the full extent of his family's betrayal. He had given his love, care, and wealth to them, believing they would respect and support him, yet they had turned against him for money and power. The police arrested Michael and Daniel, charging them with attempted fraud and poisoning. Amanda was charged with theft and embezzlement, and the corrupt doctor faced charges of medical fraud for accepting bribes and deliberately harming a patient. Michael tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The bribed doctor, desperate to save himself, confessed to his role in the scheme. Daniel, cornered by the mountain of proof, broke down and admitted his involvement, blaming his debts and desperation. Amanda, ever the actress, maintained her innocence at first. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling as she was led away in handcuffs. But the paper trail of stolen funds and property sales told a different story. Mr. Thompson watched as his family, the people he had once trusted with his heart, was taken away by the authorities. He felt a mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for what he had lost in his family, and relief that the danger had finally passed. Anna stayed by his side, offering him comfort. Although Mr. Thompson's heart was heavy, he was grateful for Anna's kindness. After the arrests, Mr. Thompson began to receive proper medical treatment. Without the harmful medications, his health started to improve slowly. His strength began to return, and his mind cleared. Every day he grew a little stronger, and the cloud of confusion that had surrounded him for so long began to lift. A few months later, Mr. Thompson was well enough to go home. His house, once filled with family, now felt empty and quiet. But he found peace in the stillness. He realized he could no longer trust the people he once held closest. Amanda, Michael, and Daniel had all betrayed him in ways he never could have imagined. Instead of feeling bitter, he focused on his gratitude. He continued to stay in touch with Anna, who often visited him to make sure he was doing well. Their friendship grew stronger, and he came to see her as the daughter he had never had. Her genuine compassion gave him a new perspective, reminding him that there were still good, honest people in the world. Then one day, after months of not hearing from Mr. Thompson, Anna received a letter from a lawyer's office, stamped with a formal seal. Mr. Thompson had passed away, peacefully in his sleep, leaving her with a final letter. Inside was a message from Mr. Thompson, written in his own handwriting. In it, he expressed his deep gratitude for her kindness, calling her a light during my darkest days. He shared that he had left her his entire fortune not out of pity but as a token of his trust. His letter spoke of his hopes that she would use it to help others, perhaps through a foundation that provided health care for those in need, a dream he knew was close to her heart. Anna read the letter with tears in her eyes, feeling both honoured and humbled. She thought of Mr. Thompson's journey, his struggle, and his resilience. She knew the money could make a difference for so many people, just as she had once dreamed. She smiled, feeling a quiet determination rise within her. In the months that followed, Anna founded a small healthcare centre for those who couldn't afford medical treatment. She named it in honour of Mr. Thompson, a man who had shown her the power of kindness, even in his final days. And as she watched the clinic's doors open each morning to people in need, she felt his spirit living on, a reminder of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength of kindness. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more great content. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might enjoy it too. See you in the next one.